Hi, it's me, Bricky. I got a pretty crazy sponsor today. This video is sponsored by Trolli, Sour Gummy Worms Supreme Company. Trolli. We've made it, boys. They've got so many flavors, and they've got so many tie-ins as well. You've got Diablo 4, Vessel of Hatred, Sea of Thieves, World of Warcraft. This one down here, the green one, this is Elder Scrolls Online. I've never felt more validated. They are doing in-game content for a variety of games, specifically the ones you see on here. And if you basically, you buy these things, you snap a picture of the receipt, you upload it to trolli.com/Xbox, you get free in-game stuff. So now you can enjoy the perfect life of eating gummy worms while playing video games, while getting in-game content. And you can see all of that by going down in the description below and going to trolli.com to check out all of the fantastic products that you can have while you do your gaming. We are in Q4 holiday season. Get yourself some sour gummy worms and live the best days. Thank you very much for sponsoring this video. And now let's talk about the end of the world. Let me freeze to death on my own. Some people are ready to sacrifice themselves to lower the food required. Colder season, heat demanding. Oh, fuck. Chat, I'm stressed out. What are your guys' thoughts on seal clubbing? A whiteout draws near, a sacrifice. No, the seals! Or kill the old people. Keep the city together. Feral children. Mods? Put them in the generator. Stuart, 5 children are dead. Oh, some of the child miners are still making their way out. It'll suffocate them too. Holy shit. Rest in peace, little Timmy. 98 children! Not my best moment. Frostpunk was a game I played many years ago, both its main game as well as its last autumn DLC. Needless to say, they were some of my more popular videos, and the knowledge that we were getting a sequel was forefront in my brain. Frostpunk 1 took place in a brand new ice age, threatening all of mankind, and the only solution being an enormous generator hastily built at the onset of the end of the world. You, as the captain, were in charge of keeping this only source of heat on while supplying food, shelter, and supplies to people whose sanity was ever dwindling. As a city builder, Frostpunk was very difficult, but also put a lot of its charm in its scenarios that you played on and the mix-ups it would throw at you. Once you figured out how to mid-max most of the game, it lost a lot of its difficulty, but that first playthrough, combined with its stellar music, art direction, and real sense of anxiety as you slowly manage your people in an ever increasingly problematic way, that was the moneymaker. Frostpunk 2 says that it's going to be bigger, more in-depth, and focus on so much more than what the original game did. And after playing both the main scenario as well as a decent amount of the endless mode, I think it's safe to say that I have a lot to talk about. So strap in, put on your work coat, prepare your legislation. So strap in, put on your work coat. So strap in, put on your work coat, eat your gruel, and don't forget about that coal. Or in this case, the oil. The largest change that Frostpunk 2 has over its original game is that it has expanded out substantially. The starting city that you begin with is an end game city from the original game. And if I were to leave a point with you right now before we even get into discussing the title, it's that this game is not trying to be Frostpunk 1.5. It is clearly and evidently trying to expand the formula and be a different kind of title. Frostpunk 1 is a hardcore, intimate city builder where you need to focus heavily on heat distribution, building placement, and the minutia of your workforce. An endgame population in Frostpunk 1 is measured in the hundreds. In the prologue alone of this game, you start with 3,000, and they're split between regular workers and the workforce. In Frostpunk 1, it was your job to survive, and in a sense, save humanity from extinction. In Frostpunk 2, it's now your job to thrive. Your player character in the first game, the captain, who is apparently this old guy, has served his time, and now his time is up. Whether you ran the city morally or turned it into a dictatorship with public executions no longer matters. It is now up to the steward to lead the people into progress. To do so, you need to truly expand, and that's where the biggest change of Frostpunk comes from: how you handle all of your buildings and economy. The days of placing individual buildings and maintaining heat are over. Now you are building districts, and each district serves a certain function. An extraction district is used to gather various supplies, coal, and other items, and the way that they're ran is through a hexagonal system. As you expand out, you need to frost break to break down all of the ice to allow you to then place districts. So instead, you're paving your way for the expansion, and each of your districts has its own use. Housing districts, food districts, industrial districts, logistical districts, murder districts, huge dicks and tits. They are all as important to the end game and getting everything you need. This is mainly because Frostpunk 2 has far more currencies that need to be managed compared to the original game. People are still a resource, of course, that can be spent as freely as you'd like, but unlike the original game that's mainly coal, which you better not have forgotten about, lumber, metal, cores, and food, now a lot of that is quantified in a different way. You have heat, shelter, food, materials, and goods. That is often just for supplying the city in its own right, because you also have coal, oil, steam, Frostland teams, and guard squads as well that are resources that can be stored and only used when necessary. But I'm not done. You also have heat stamps, prefabs, cores, and the workforce I mentioned earlier. And this is where the management of Frostpunk 2 really goes to the moon, because you are running a city with demographics of people all with their own agendas and wants. But now that we're somewhat past the whole we're all going extinct section, now your people want stuff from you back. For example, heat stamps are basically taxes, and your people provide them every single week. The more people you have, the more heat stamps they produce. But now, if you want your people to build things for you, it'll cost you heat stamps in addition to whatever else you want to spend. Example, let's say you want to build an industrial district. This lets you produce either goods for your people, which keeps crime low, or prefabs, which is a requirement to build other buildings. First, you need to frost break an area for the district, which will cost you heat stamps. But then building this district will cost you 600 of your workforce, 40 of your heat stamps, 120 prefabs, and demand 50 materials for its upkeep every single week. The food district costs 600 workforce, 100 heat stamps, 200 prefabs, demands 50 materials, and 40 heat every week, but then produces 60 food each week as well. And this is just referring to the districts. This is just where I'm at a current part of the game. This can change, and does consistently, and depends on a lot of factors like research, laws, and events in the story. Every single thing, much like in the original game, requires every other thing to sustain it. More people means more workers, which means more districts, which means more production, which means more upkeep, which means more homes to make, which means more mouths to feed, which means more heat needed, which means more districts, which needs more people, and round we go. If one break in the chain occurs, then everything suffers. Not enough supplies means buildings fail, which means you need to build more buildings, which means you might need heat stamps that you don't have. And then because you don't have the supplies, you run out of food, which has your people starve, which means they provide fewer heat stamps. The dead don't pay taxes. It is constant management of every important resource, which was the name of the game in Frostpunk 1, but now we get to make it even more difficult with the inclusion of politics. In the olden days, you were the captain, and what you said would go, unless what you said was really bad, in which they might turn on you and exile you from your home. Now, you are the steward, and while not everything you say goes, you are the guiding hand for the new council. Instead of hope and discontent, you have the various factions that are happy with you around and the general trust they have in you. When your trust is good, the inner orb is calm, and when your people do not trust you, it is turbulent and boiling over. So not only do you need to manage the trust of your people, but you need to determine which factions you want to work with and how to keep them on your side. Being a fence sitter is amazing at times, and especially in the beginning, but eventually someone is going to be pissed off at you because you keep doing stuff that doesn't align with their beliefs. And that's particularly frightening when the people pissed at you wrestle polar bears for fun. Playing politics is one of the more difficult parts of Frostpunk 2, and it's the source of where a lot of your various factions and directions might go. Now, in the first game, you had laws and research. When it came to research, this was almost entirely net positives for you and your city. Automation, efficiency, things that truly bettered your populace in its entirety. When it came to laws, adaptation was the big one, keeping yourself alive, and for the most part, most of it was morally acceptable. At least at the beginning. There would sometimes be a push here and there. A fighting arena is a great way to relieve stress, but dueling can be a bit much. A public house isn't the worst thing ever, especially at the end of the world, but a brothel has its issues. The only one good and truly moral choice was child labor, because they do in fact yearn for the mines, and everyone knows the kids are right, so in the mines they go. But the really fun stuff came down to when you had to work with purpose. When discontent was high and hope was low, you as the captain chose faith versus order, a religious figurehead or a totalitarian dictator, or both. In Frostpunk 2, laws are often choices made depending on faction. It's often far less morally good or bad, but just generally how you want to run your city. If you're working with a system that handles goods, you can make durable goods that are sturdy and easily repairable, which helps you get slightly more goods for your demand. Or you could do mass-produced goods, which gives your efficiency way higher of a boost, but people don't love the crappy mass-produced goods, so you get a bit of increased tension. You can create a system where the basic necessities are paid for, increasing heat stamp income and production efficiency, or you can give people free essentials, which is great for trust, but increases tension a bit. You can have a ceremonial funeral, which helps you regain trust when people die, or you can harvest their bodies, which is very good for research speed and reducing disease. But yeah, people don't love it when you chop their dead grandparent up to use in the soup. It's the same kind of thing with the first game. Your research is the same way, and the choices you make will lead towards a particular type of zeitgeist, and the benefits and drawbacks are based around what you need the most. More production for more workforce, but increases squalor. Less requirements, but less output. Where things can backslide is when certain groups end up gaining a large amount of power and their options and ideas become foster. Each group has certain things they strive for. The technocrats clearly are interested in the advancement of technology and to use it for industry, automation, and to force out the cold and let humanity thrive. The Ice Bloods, yes, the polar bear wrestling people, believe entirely in adaptation. The Frost will not go anywhere. This is our new life. It is better that we as a species adapt. In one of my endless runs, I thought that wrestling polar bears was, kinda based, so I went hard into the ideas of the Ice Bloods. This started off pretty well, very much survival of the fittest and make sure those that are strong work in the city properly. A bit of a nebulous concept in our day and age, but for the world of Frostpunk, it's arguably tame. However, as time goes on, their ideals become a bit more radical, since I've supported them for such a long time, and research chooses one of the factions to amplify, so you start getting some fascinating ideas like procreation. If we are to survive, women have an obligation to bear offspring. Mothers will thus be rewarded for each birth, and childless women will be punished. Incredible. And I'm just not really interested in reading this next one. Of course, not everyone is going to want to vote for these things, and often many will end up opposing certain ideals. When you vote for something, you will need to get over 50% approval, and therefore have to play the role of the steward of politics. One faction doesn't want to vote, get their vote by promising them something. The ability to vote on the next law, promise to enact a law for them, or build something that furthers their goals. Doing so will increase your standing with them, and the better the standing with a faction, the more aligned they will be with you and the more benefits you will get. Have them become extremely devoted, and they may even start a rally for you, which allows you to choose getting more workforce, heat stamps, and other options. Of course, as I'm sure you expected, the opposite is also true. Have a faction hate you enough, and they may end up radicalizing. This fervor will cause them not only to strike, which disables your workplaces, but it also causes violence, which will mean population death and damage to your district, which will need prefabs to repair. So not only are you managing the survival of your people, where every single cost is weighed against the opportunity cost of something else, while realizing that one single thing falling could bring the whole thing down, while maintaining the trust and reducing tension in your city, while keeping the politicians happy, and now guess what? You don't have a permanent source of fuel or anything. So now you have to learn to expand outside your borders. The Logistics District is the main group meant to give out Frostland teams, which, if you may recall, are the Giga Chad scouts from the last game, except they're a little less Giga Chad than before. Frostland teams are a currency that are spent, except instead are replenished when used. As you go out into the frozen waste, you explore various areas, and the areas have different rewards and difficulties. A barren valley may only cost 10 teams to survey and be relatively safe, whereas mountainous regions may cost 20 Frostland teams, and you may end up with a lot of deaths, lowering your workforce volume and population. But in exchange, you can get discoveries that can provide all sorts of things, perhaps a huge stockpile of supplies to bring back, or survivors to increase your population, or my favorite,
you have just given me my $1 million!
Great. Well, what do I win?
Nothing! Now get out!
But often you can find a huge stockpile of resources like food or coal that you can set up as a trail line to bring back to the city. This will just be a completely brand new resource option that you get so long as you make a trail to connect and deliver. But the big money, Spider-Man, is the settlement. That's right, we expand beyond the city now. We move it farther and farther out into the wastes, and now we can create colonies, entirely brand new cities that rely on whatever is present there. Then this makes another new system of trade. This new colony will need supplies from the main city, so you can have them send a certain amount there every single week, as well as people if needed. But with those supplies, the colony can become self-sustaining, if not over-proficient, and then be the one sending stuff back to the main city. In fact, move over, scouts. We have a new Giga Chad here, and it's the colonists' political faction. They don't ask for anything. They don't participate in laws. They just stand there faceless, doing whatever you say and whatever you ask. And because of that level of loyalty, they get an A+ in the quote, won't ruin the lives of humanity because you harvested their family's organs, unquote, scale. In my entire first playthrough, the colonists of the Dreadnought were consistently my favorite people to check in on, because every single time I saw them, they were doing their job diligently, were never complaining, and constantly had surpluses of everything they need being sent back to the major city. This isn't the only major course of going out and exploring the wastes, but it's a pretty darn good one, and making another colony is a huge investment, but the payout is not only great, but required. The amount of unlimited resource areas you found in Frostpunk 1 feel like they've been reduced, or at least just not as impactful as they were in the first game. Having a huge network of Frostland teams bringing back food, people, supplies, and crafting trails to just add new additional sources of materials is what you will always need to win this game. Not to mention just how crazy far it expands. A late game map, it resembles a circulatory system covered in precious veins and arteries pumping in and out from the heart of the Frostland. For the most part, out, that's where a lot of the differences come from between Frostpunk 1 and 2. The game truly has been expanded upon in a myriad of ways, not just in mechanics, but also in playstyle. In the original game, they had a large amount of various other scenarios that came out with DLC, including a substantial one called The Last Autumn. But the game launched with a couple of various scenarios as well as its main story, as well as its endless mode. Frostpunk 2 launches with its endless mode, but only a single major story that, and don't quote me on this, feels like it's more substantial in terms of game hours, but only barely. All this aside, what really will determine if you like Frostpunk 2 like you enjoyed Frostpunk 1 is entirely dependent on what you are looking to get out of this game title of Frostpunk. And that's where I've seen a good bit of mixed reactions on it, including myself. This is something I really want to stress. I really need to point out and show, and that's how much appreciation I have for 11-bit studios not phoning it in and making Frostpunk 1.5, because that was the safe option, and it would have sold very well regardless. This is not just the sequel to Frostpunk. This is a brand new video game with huge changes, not just mechanics, but also tone, setting, and theming. It would have been so easy for them to just have played it safe, but they didn't. They went out to make a video game that expanded upon their initial concept, and they took a real risk that way. And despite whether or not you like it, more or less, the very act of doing that is applaudable, especially because as a game, there's very little that I think deviates in quality from the original. For starters, the base qualities of Frostpunk are still here on full display. The game's art direction is unparalleled. This combination of like post-apocalyptic steampunk mixed with an ice age is just so unique, and I think they even go harder in some parts in this game. One of my personal favorite aspects is problems in your city, such as cold, disease, squalor, and crime. All things affected by various factors of your buildings can be shown as more severe based on how much you see this oil smeared like stream running down from it. The blackness of oil in its own right is such a great visual juxtaposition from the intense brightness of the white snow everywhere, and it's used to such a great degree. In Frostpunk 1, that was mainly taken up by coal, but in this one, the running of the oil like veins through your city and the smoky wisp and drip of it goes across all of the main character and story moments. The aesthetic is still unparalleled, and this continues with all of the other great parts of the first game, like, of course, the soundtrack. There's also this great effect that they use when it comes to the people. You may remember parts of the trailer where they constantly whisper, "Steward, Steward, 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 Stewie Griffin." But that's brought up every single time you click on any of the factions. So as you're going through micromanaging all of it, you can literally make that trailer moment just happen in game. I also want to give credit where credit's due when it comes to the UI and UX of this game. One of my biggest complaints I had when I was playing the beta, I don't like the UI, I won't lie, and seeing the trailers, was that the UI I thought looked quite bad. It reminded me too much of an Apple product with its bright white color scheme, and I think it genuinely clashed against the bright white environment and didn't have that same Frostpunk style gear shifting motif to it like the first game did. They've since updated the UI before the release of the game, and while I still don't think it's as good as the first game, I do think it's a hell of a lot better and very easy to navigate. Plus, it has a dark mode, which, you know, like every software nowadays needs a dark mode, but the fact that a video video game has a dark mode is just kind of peak. It might seem like there's a lot going on screen, but it's presented to you in the main scenario nicely piecemeal, and it isn't something that you just have to worry about that much. I got the hang of it pretty quickly, and with the adjustments of some of the UI and the header and footer, I think it actually holds its own quite well, especially when you zoom out and you get to see the entire Frostland. However, it's not all upgrades for Frostpunk 2, and a lot of it ends up coming off as trade-offs. One of the most important differences between the two games is that this one is so much more disconnected from the average person. As mentioned before, this is not about the intimate struggle to survive. This is about the ability to thrive. So in doing so, the people of your city are not as highlighted. You will occasionally get a random person's face pop up with the occasional bit of flavor text and some statement regarding a law or research you made, but there are basically no consequences whatsoever to it. It's more just additional flavor text based on your choices, where in the first game, these situations were choices in their own right. That made things a lot more personable. That made it so that what you were doing as the captain felt more intimate. In the first game, it was being proactive and giving you crazy choices to affect your run. In this game, it's more reactive, and it's just kind of explaining to you the things that you already made choices on. One of the craziest and most heartfelt moments of the first game was that father that went out to find his daughter in the middle of the final whiteouts, making it safe, a choice that you made to let him go out there. And that level of heroism is just not as presented here because it's such a zoomed out perspective. But on the flip side, you could certainly argue that's the point. And I think as I play through the game, I believe it definitely was the point. I found the backslide into debaucherous things, such as more and more radical ideas, to be significantly easier. There is very little negative to signing forced procreation in your radical ideals because you're just writing the law. You don't see the true effect of what you're doing because the only outcome you notice is the population go up. You are alone in your office making decisions that affect tens of thousands and are disconnected from that group itself, when the captain was making decisions for a couple hundred. Which, yeah, I mean, that just sounds like being a politician. But the negatives that come with these decisions aren't as apparent, and there isn't as much of a moral ambiguity with it like in the first game, which again could be the point. But despite whether or not it is the point, it does create an end result in which you are far more disconnected from your people. Frostpunk 1 was a hardcore city builder. Frostpunk 2 is a 4X game. Really, the stress comes from managing all of the individual factions and making sure that they have what they want, and the higher amount of stress comes from meeting the proper requirements. Backsliding on resources and managing all the political factions is the real struggle, because for the most part, having a political faction be your best friend is nowhere near as affecting as them being your worst enemy. If a faction rallies, you get some heat stamps or some kind of workforce or something like that, but if they strike, your whole building is shut down and it requires materials and guard squads to repair, which you may or may not have. It is seriously weighted that the negatives are far more impactful than the positives, and it gets really shit when the political party is mad at you and doesn't want you to vote on passing a law that you positively absolutely need right now, or you're all going to die. Democracy is for the people, by the people, but the people are frostbitten. A lot of Frostpunk 1 was making sure that you handle the end of the world while not overworking and punishing your community, because if you did, they would exile you or steam you alive. It was writing that perfect tightrope balance between hope and discontent. Doing good things for people that cost you supplies versus saving supplies and putting the weight on them. That was the balancing act. In this game, you're fighting against the people. Satisfying their requirements and desires directly goes with and against your methods of building the city. In fact, this is so personified because one of the first things in the 5-chapter main campaign is to survive another one of the major whiteouts. That's right, the final endgame boss of Frostpunk 1 is one of the stepping stool bosses in the earlier chapters of Frostpunk 2. That's how far you have come. In fact, one of the turning points of the main story is actually how you handle two of the major factions, the Pilgrims and the Stalwarts, or Faith Keepers, which is a really cool thing because you get to pick which of these is the main sub-faction based on whether or not you went order or faith in the first game. This doesn't require you to have played the first game. It's just a cool choice you make in the beginning of the prologue. It's a neat touch. It's a cool idea. In my playthrough, I had the Pilgrims and the Stalwarts, and these two are completely opposed to each other in ideals. The Pilgrims believe in adaptation, equality, and tradition, where the Stalwarts are mainly about progress, merit, and reason. Both tend to have their benefits and negatives. Often, the Pilgrims will find methods that are very effective at things like gathering food and getting supplies that leave far fewer negatives in their wake. The Stalwarts are much more mechanical and tend to go heavy into things like automatons, machinery, and so on, which massively increase productivity but leave behind way more negatives such as squalor, disease, and inequality. This is very easily seen in things like your research. Often you have 4 factions, 2 on 2, both sides of the fence, and when you research a specific item, you are pushing towards one of those groups and you can visually see the difference between them. But eventually, you will need to make some very big decisions, particularly as you get to find the beautiful world of Winterhome. That's right, baby! The great ineptitude comes back to bite you, as Winterhome is a major source of political turmoil and decision-making in the later stages of Frostpunk 2's main campaign. Whether you chose to adapt to the Frost, the Pilgrim route, or defeat the Frost, the Stalwart route, comes to a head here on whether or not you decide to recolonize Winterhome. And that is when one faction is going to feel much less cared for. Tensions will boil up, the red fist icon will sprout on their logos, and you, the steward, have made an error, and one of your group is going to help you correct that. Dad, why did you name my sister Orchid? Well, son, that's because an orchid is your mother's favorite thing in the world. Oh, that makes sense. Thanks, Dad. No problem. Trumpet section during the anger soundtrack in the Civil War of Frostpunk 2? Where the final boss of Game 1 was a fight against the most brutal effects of Mother Nature, the fight of this game is against your fellow kin. Whatever faction felt betrayed executes someone in the council, and it is full-blown civil war. Tons of buildings go on strike, unrest is building in all areas, there is rioting in the streets, people are dying, and you need to be prepared to handle this. It's a fascinating choice for the end of this game, and it actually gave me a lot more appreciation for what they were going for here. For most of my playtime, I was just enjoying myself, don't get me wrong, but I kept getting that feeling that I keep mentioning. This is just not quite what I was looking for in terms of Frostpunk. But this final boss, this concept, really solidifies what they wanted to do. And it was so not what I expected that I found myself just really loving it. Maybe I'm one of those overly pretentious, Bricky you hack, human condition people, but the idea that people would go to war against each other at the end of the world is just such a genius idea for a end boss fight in a game like this. It really tests not only the strength of your diplomacy, but also your need to be ready at any point in time. People tend not to wait for an opportune moment for their leaders before they begin rioting. Of course, that tends to go out the window when you do repeat playthroughs and then you know what's coming, but that's not necessarily the point I'm trying to make here. I just like the knowledge that instead of preparing for a giant storm that you have to sit and wait out and pray that everything goes well, you instead need to handle a game-ending event immediately. And instead of doing nothing, you have to do everything. It's just such a well-designed concept, and it really made me pleased with how they wrapped it up. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I do think they fall back on that somewhat mediocre method of giving you a various ending with text at the finale of the game scenario. In particular, in this one, you can bless a young child in the beginning of the game, and you can see how they've ended up at the end. I did not end up with a particularly happy child, as you can see on screen. But considering how I normally treat children in Frostpunk, trying to guilt trip me on this is putting oil on snow. 2 more children have been sent to the mines. I had the same iffy feeling with the original game. Don't guilt trip me on my methods. I saved the world, but I understand it's more for the player's benefit of, hey, not going too far with your policies, but bitch, I don't care, I saved the world. But yeah, is this as enjoyable of a scenario as Frostpunk 1's A New Home? Not quite, but it's still something worth playing. Ironically, I've been finding myself having a substantially better time with the game's endless mode than I did with the first game's endless mode. Since there's so much more to do and so much more to discover, I find heading out and trying all kinds of new options to be really fun and seeing how far I can truly go out into the wastes. They also give you a variety of difficulties, various types of political parties, and starting areas that you can choose from between different other types of objectives to be the main thing you aim to complete, and so on. Plus, your cities can get pretty astronomical in a very good way, so the replayability of this mode I think is pretty consistent, especially if you get a chance to just listen to the music the way you do. The disconnect that comes with Frostpunk 2 is very much surrounding what you are looking to get. If you look at the reviews for this game, you'll see it say mostly positive, with a lot of the reviews centered around it not being as good as the first game, often saying the first game was lightning in a bottle, and replicating that was just not possible. Also, it should go without saying, there are some technical issues with the game. I particularly had a decent amount of stutters, especially during saving areas, and when you have a really big city, it will tend to lag. I do have to agree with that initial synopsis, however. The first game was lightning in a bottle. It truly was a phenomenal product and remains one of the most enjoyable and intense city builders out there. And it makes me wonder if this game is being held back by the name Frostpunk, as opposed to 4X Cold Metal. Well, that would have done a better job. You know, the scale has been shifted, the themes have been changed, the gameplay loop has been expanded and zoomed out, and all of these things can be seen as negatives if you are hoping for more of the original, which you wouldn't be faulted for wanting. It's literally a sequel. To me, Frostpunk 2 is a side grade. It's a different game that is roughly the same quality of the first game, if not maybe a little bit worse. There are some genuine flaws with this title, specifically the optimization stuff I mentioned earlier, and I do think they wasted a bit of the opportunity with the oil visuals. They do use it a lot, but the oil itself is not a very important thing for this game. I mean, they give you the option for Steam as another resource later on. Just kind of throw it out there. Like, I kind of expected a bit more like fanfare. I do really like Frostpunk 2. I found the experience of playing this video game to be genuinely enjoyable, and it checks all of the boxes, you know, art direction, soundtrack, intensity, theming. They were all checked off and squared away. Did I enjoy it as much as the first one? I would say no, but my expectations do come into play here, and it would have to be a goddamn monster of a video game to ever beat the first run through of A New Home or The Last Autumn. So I would call it a side grade. I still consider it well worth the time I spent and the $45 I paid. I do wish that they had a few more scenarios, but I also find the endless mode has more replayability, so they kind of cancel each other out. But it was also only 13 gigabytes to download, and in this modern day, it's pretty great. I don't give out of 10 number ratings on my stuff because I think it's just a horrible system, you know? Like, is a 6 slightly above average, so pretty good, or is it a D? Is it a 6 that's like in an IGN thing where it almost feels like they actually go from 5 to 10 as their main scale, or is it actually a 6? It's good, but not great. So here's my new scale. It's out of 4 bricks. All right, Brick 1 is a terrible video game. Absolutely awful. Brick 2, not very good. Not the worst thing you've ever played. Brick 3, pretty darn good. I'd say worth it. And Brick 4, near masterpiece. Frostpunk 2 is a 3-brick type game. It's pretty darn good. I like it. It's not perfect, has its issues, but I'd say it's worth picking up. So long as you don't forget about that oil, though. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I appreciate it a ton. Excited to get back into the groove of things. I'll have plenty of other videos coming out for the rest of the year. You'll see me around, the usual. Have a great one.